off the back. Welcome back, everyone. Day two of the Tone Dome. My name is Brandon. Today, I'm very pleased and grateful to have someone who I owe a lot of my growth to in the final years of my undergrad at the Manhattan School of Music. He is the principal bass trombone of the New York Philharmonic, Mr. George Curran. Mr. Curran, how are you?
I'm great. It's great to see you, Brandon.
You too. You too. How's everything? You and I both managed to escape the city before things unfortunately got a little crazy, so to speak. How's life in quarantine been for you, your family, the little one, Kayla, as well?
Yeah, we last I saw you, we were both in New York, and now neither one of us is there. Um, and yeah, you're up in Montreal. I am living, I guess, for a while probably with some family over in Michigan. So we're having a great time. We have a lot more space than the apartment that we had before, and it's a my mother-in-law at her we're at her place, and Sharon, she's great, and yeah, our 4-year-old Kayla is loving having a yard for sure.
That's awesome. How throughout this entire quarantine, how are you staying in shape when many of us, fingers crossed that this doesn't happen, but many of us aren't preparing for anything at the moment, and quite possibly nothing until the new year.
Well, depends on what kind of shape you're talking about, but certainly chop shape.
Yeah, yeah, playing shape. Yeah, yeah.
Um, you know, it's I you know I've I, I'm a pretty motivated person, and this is I've spent a lot of time working on a lot of things. I've did a bunch of different projects, like you might imagine somebody who's like in the New York Philharmonic and teaching places. So you know, last night, for example, was the last night of recitals for students of mine over at MSM. But I've been giving teaching lessons basically up through last week or this past week, and certainly if only for those reasons, to stay in shape to be working with students, and I'll be continuing to work with students. I think throughout the summer, I've been doing some private teaching um, on Zoom, and I think that there's a decent way to do that if you even though you can't necessarily be live. There's some strategies that work. Um, and I the Philharmonic has done several online projects, from a bolero recording to a Mahler 2 brass section thing, um, and and I think that those things are important, and so it's good to be sort of ready to for someone to say, well, we've got this recording here, we're going to send you the part, and can you send it back to us tomorrow, or we're going to do some sort of a stream. You got to kind of be ready for anything, sort of like a lot of people in the freelance community normally are, but obviously you've got to be a little more creative right now with your opportunities. And some of the
Right.
things that that I've been preparing for are some things that I'm working on my own to prepare for. I have my own projects that I've been doing, and I think that ultimately, um, being a musician it's a creative thing, but it's also about product. You can't just sit in a practice room and be a musician. You've got to get out there and do some performing and get in front of some people or get in front of some cameras these days, and just do do things. Do your thing. So I'm working on doing that.
Awesome. Are you trying to keep the same day-to-day routine that you had when none of this was happening, or have things drastically changed?
Well, to be honest, I'm practicing more than normal, um, uh, because the Philharmonic is pretty busy. We usually have about 4 rehearsals a week, so we're talking like, you know, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday would be pretty busy with rehearsals, and then Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday have concerts. I'll be teaching at 3 different schools in addition to MSM. I teach at Manus and I teach at Rutgers, and I have to go to all 3 different places, and so it's hard to do all that in one day. So those have to get, you know, you have to find things for the find times during the day for that, and then my normal routine during uh, normal business hours would be to, if I guess if it's a rehearsal day in the morning, then I'll just get there as soon as I drop Kayla off at school, and I'll do sort of. It's usually a quicker routine just because of the timing of that. And then on days that I'm off, I have a more leisurely routine like after breakfast and an hour, 90 minutes or something like that that I'll do. It's warm up and some things that I'm working on. Um, but these days I'll have blocks of time right in the afternoon. Katie and I, my wife Katie and I, try really hard to give each other the time we need for our each of our work that we need to do, and then Nama Sharon, uh, I, Kayla's grandma, she's been amazing help. I mean, we're in a super lucky situation to have supportive family who can basically say, stay here indefinitely until things get better. And we're just you got to be really structured with your time because otherwise, um, it seems like there's nothing going on, but all of a sudden you'll realize the day's gone.
Right. That's great. Speaking of daily routine, what is your daily routine in terms of warming up in the morning, if you don't mind sharing with the world?
Yeah. Well, people could look it up actually. What sort of a standard routine that I do? I have a website, lasttrombone.com, um, and there's a PDF right on the front page there. At the bottom that you can download. It's got like 12 exercises that I come back to pretty regularly. I'm not one who's like an absolutist on doing routine the same every day. So I'll do some of those exercises. There are some other ones, just get some, get the, get the air moving, get the blood in the lips, and then do some nice long tones, lip slurs, articulation, a little bit of extreme range and dynamic just to warm it up a little bit, but nothing that's gonna. I like to be gentle to myself. You get older, and you start to realize that it can sort of last throughout the day if you just went for it a little bit too much in the morning. So
Right. Awesome. And after you get through everything, how do you go about scheduling your practice sessions throughout the day?
well, usually it's whatever free time I have. I mean, the getting around New York, whether it's driving or the subway, I'll try to get to rehearsals early. I mean, one of the things that I learned probably back when I was in school, at least, was um, before I go to bed, I need to know what the layout of my day looks like for the next day. I may not be able to think of how the whole week is going to line up, but I need to know sort of where I am and how much time I have for things. Um, when I was an undergrad, one of my teachers for a year basically was Mark Fisher, who plays in the Lyric Opera in Chicago, and I was a euphonium student still at the time, and he I think I was probably still finding my way, and he said, for practice sessions, I think I might have said I didn't have time to practice this week or something to that effect. And he says, well, you have to think of your practice sessions as a class, right? Like, and so if you have a 2, 4, 6 hour class, um, and you miss it, then you need to make that up the next day. So if you've got 3 or 4 hours of practicing in, you don't get too far behind before you have like an insurmountable mountain to make up. So that was for me a really good thing. I mean, you have to just decide to commit to it too. So, but um, yeah, I mean, it's usually working. I mean, everybody's busy. I can think of pretty much nobody in my life that isn't, busy with a lot of things. And I think what you do is you prioritize the things that are immovable in your schedule first, like things like classes or work or whatever that you can't possibly move around. Schedule on the time that needs, that you need to do to get to and from, or other things that are, you need to know. I've got to eat meals today. You've got, whatever you're going to have to do, and then some of that's flexible. You can work around the time, or you can multitask. But usually, there's a pretty obvious block of time that you should be really gunning for to take care of the most of your work. So, knowing that well in advance really helps for when you actually sit down in your chair to practice, because you knew kind of like yesterday that at 2 p.m., for example, you were going to be practicing. So there's sort of a your body sort of and your mind prepares itself for an event that it knows is going to happen. So you can really slide into like a practice mode pretty quickly um, if you know it's coming from a ways off.
Right. Awesome. And during these practice sessions, if you're looking to learn a solo, a concerto, a sonata, or break down something in an etude or excerpt, is there a process that you use? I guess getting down to it, what goes on through your mind in order to have a successful practice session?
Well, um, as things got busier and busier with me in my career, I found that I had to look farther and farther ahead, uh, to see what kind of performances were coming up to be prepared. Because some things, I mean, for Brahms symphonies coming up, I don't need to prepare in the same way that I need to prepare if I've got a new concerto I've never played, right? Obviously, I take good care on it, and I would say for sure that the study that I was so fortunate to have really been very proactive in my student life to really be sort of as much of a scholar about the major repertoire pieces in the orchestra. Uh, that I really tried to know the parts as well as I could, to really know the history, listen to lots of different performances, and so that when you get into your first opportunity at a gig, whether it's just like a one-off thing or you sit down and this is the first day of the season, you have a pretty good depth of understanding for a good chunk of the repertoire before you've even started preparing, and it gives you a lot of help there. But yeah, I look at the pieces that are basically on my plate or that are on my music stand, and I basically prioritize them um, to make sure that there's going to be a pile of things that are always going to stay in the front because there's a lot of work they're not ready, and but I'm gonna have to work in things that are maybe less of a I don't want to say they're less of a priority, but they're less of a danger zone, to be in with them. So if Mahler 5 is coming up, that's going to be on. Even though I've played it several times, I'm going to make sure to keep that in a pretty good rotation. As either part of the warm up or just I don't need to practice the whole symphony either. Like once the piece, which lines, which pages you need to be looking at. Um, and the same thing with working on a concerto. I mean, once I've been practicing a piece for a while, I don't need to look at all 15 pages of it. I need to be looking at sections of 5 pages of it, and that can be way more efficient with your practice. Um, and then, uh, and then, at the end of every practice session, I try to give myself some sort of like a bone. If you work first and then you reward yourself. So maybe I'm not allowing myself to practice the easy melodic parts of some solo. Well, the end of your practice session is the perfect time to just let yourself enjoy it. It's a nice way to send yourself off with on a positive note. No pun intended, I guess, but that you remember really strongly the beginning and ends of things. So you're finishing your session, sort of um, in a really energetic and positive way, where you're playing things that you know how to play. You're playing things that make you more, make you that are enjoyable and make you happy. So, but yeah, certainly. I mean, I have a repertoire list that goes about a year or more in advance. I play at the Southeast Trombone Symposium um, down in Columbus State every June or July, and I already know. I mean, obviously, it's coming up. The next one is coming up, and it's probably gonna get slid back, or there's some changes coming there. But um, you know, I have a list for that. I have other solo performances, and I try to not try to learn 15 solos at once either. If I can possibly, you know, double dip some of these things, it certainly helps, because you put a lot of work into something, and I find that if I only play it once, uh, it seems like a lot of work for one moment. But if you get some more times to play it, not only does your interpretation get better, you've approached it, you know what it's like to go through this live now, and you have maybe a different idea about form for the piece and proportion. But also, you know you you get to really love the piece more and just feel like you've had a few more shots at it.
Great. Awesome. You mentioned the euphonium not too long ago. I wanted to ask, that way I don't accidentally blow over it. As we discussed earlier, I heard from Logan, and then later read that you were a engineering major for a big chunk of your undergrad degree, eventually switching to performance your senior year. Did you still play euphonium during that period? Was music on the metaphorical back burner, so to speak? And when did that light switch go off when you said, I have to switch to a performance degree?
Well, I certainly didn't have the normal uh, musical upbringing that a lot of people that I've met over the years have had. And I'm not saying that I didn't have support musically from my family, but I mean certainly they they were supportive of pretty much everything. I was one of those kids back in school who was sort of involved in everything, um, whether it was all the different. I mean, I was certainly preparing for engineering in high school, and I was in the academic, like the AP classes and advanced calculus, and yeah, starting to work on computers, and just there are a lot of different things. I was in soccer, and I joined the marching band. I was in a community band. I was sort of there were extracurriculars that were not just. I mean, I certainly loved doing them. I loved the whole social aspect, and I loved the music. But I never really thought seriously about it as a career because everyone says there are no careers in music. So, I mean, certainly you've heard people say that. I'm sure, and I mean, it isn't true. But when you're told that by a bunch of people, then usually you believe it.
Right.
So. So I started at the University of Michigan as an engineering major, but I signed up for lessons. I mean, in the fall, I didn't really know what the music school was all about. So I was in Michigan. The engineering school is literally right across the street from the music school, and so I was signing up for lessons, being in the campus band, and marching in the marching band, and like those things. That was like it was fun. And but when I saw all these people, and then I heard some euphonium players, and I was like, wow, these guys are really good. Later did I find out that like half of those people were going to end up in bands like the Marine Band and teaching college professionally, and like it was kind of a intimidating situation. But so I started as an engineering major and took classes along with some music classes just because like I think I signed up for music theory just because I don't know. It was an option, and it would be an elective for engineering. But then I quickly realized I wanted to double major because I couldn't give up music, and that nobody could tell me otherwise. I knew it was going to be like a 7 year undergrad situation, but anyway, so things happen. Reality starts to set in, and I'm realizing maybe I don't want to be a professional euphonium player because I'm thinking about what does that mean. Like that's why I'm in engineering, but I really felt like I just couldn't let go of music, and so I thought maybe I'll teach. So I transferred to Central Michigan, still playing euphonium, but this time it was in a music education degree, and as I got farther and farther through it, um, I mean, I touched a little bit of trombone, but I hadn't really thought about it seriously until like right near the end of my undergrad, and I said, if I can do this, like I feel like the best quality of life for me would be it'd be just super fun to like if I could be in an orchestra or in a military band or teach college as a musician, as a performing musician. I don't necessarily need to be like trying to play the hardest, newest most crazy avant-garde stuff. I just, if I could get a job doing this, that would be seriously like that would be the a plan for happiness for me. And if I could do that, that'd be great. If I can't, then I'll still have an education degree, and I enjoy teaching. So I would regret it if I don't try. So I said, well, let's just pick up the trombone seriously now. And one of the other inspirations that I got for how to get started was way back when Mark Fisher was teaching me back in at Michigan, and he said, I switched from euphonium. He was a former Fritz Kendig student on euphonium,
Oh,
and
awesome.
his CD is actually fantastic. It's one of my favorite euphonium CDs he came out with. But he said, yeah, I just gave myself whatever amount of time, like a year or something, to do a recital. Said learn some basic repertoire and just stumble your way through a recital. Um, and that really spoke to me. Said basically like if I just really switched to trombone, I could sit there in the practice room forever earning degrees. But if I make myself play solo, like that's gonna it's gonna be humbling for sure. But you'll practice a lot more than you would have otherwise. Joe Alessi's I saw a Joe Alessi quote long before I was in the Philharmonic that said, "There's nothing like fear to make you practice," and that's a hard axiom to argue with.
Awesome. So music definitely seems to have had a big impact on you, of course now, but definitely during your undergrad, as we discussed. Uh, Talk about some of your early influences. Who or what uh, caused this change, or were a big influence on this change? Who were you listening to a lot of in your undergrad, and if you'd like to share, what are you listening to a lot of now?
Well, during undergrad and even in high school, I remember just loving listening to the Chicago Symphony. I mean, they had so many great recordings. Obviously, the Philharmonic and San Francisco and Philadelphia. There are a lot of other great recordings with brass and great brass sections. Remember, people have been doing that Facebook thing where you share 10 album covers. I remember wearing out the Gabrielli recording with the three original brass sections, and um, there was a cassette that I had when I was the euphonium player, the Gerard Meinl tuba quartet, who was like,
Yeah.
it was who was it? Sam Palafian and Warren Deck and Enrique Crespo and I'm just like, there are a bunch of guys. I'm trying to. It's a sextet, so
Yeah.
these guys were like all monsters, and they just really made music sound amazing. So that was where that was where the first place I ever heard that Bruckner etude. I mean, that was written by Enrique Crespo. So certainly those kind of things were amazing. I mean, I remember listening and just being in awe of listening to like the Chicago uh, Planets and Symphony Fantastique and you know and as a euphonium player, you listen to the planets, but then I would just keep listening to the trombone parts. So it was always sort of like I always felt like I blew my air like a trombone player, and really muscling the euphonium. You can probably get away with, especially as a bass trombone player, probably 50% of your air to make a euphonium work. So, um, but but also the facility that I had on the euphonium really helped me, to play the trombone with a little less fear and a little more continuous air. I think that there are a lot of former euphonium players or people who have learned how to play on the valves that play trombone, not just bass trombone. So I think that's certainly. I felt like that at the very least that learning these two similar but quite different instruments really helped me learn sort of brass playing from a different perspective.
That's great. So day to day at the Philharmonic, you were appointed in 2013, and then were later joined by a few of your colleagues from Atlanta, Colin, Richard, and Chris Martin. How's the experience in the Philharmonic been like? What was the selection process like? And how have Mr. Williams, Mr. Dean, and Mr. Martin added to the excitement of the appointment?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Actually, all four of us uh, played in a brass quintet with Mike DeShone, trumpet player who is still in the ASO, um, on Colin's wedding. So like it was
awesome.
back in Atlanta, and actually Mike was runner up to Ethan, so we almost had a full on brass quintet move up here. Um, uh, so Ethan Bensdorf is the second trumpet here
Great.
in New York, but so yeah, I mean we were all good colleagues. Chris had moved to Chicago before I joined the Atlanta Symphony, so Tom Hooten and I joined at the exact same time. Our auditions were like a week apart, and now Tom is also left, and he's principal in L.A. So it's been quite the diaspora of brass players from the Atlanta Symphony for sure. Yeah, I mean, it was kind of weird, you know. There were a bunch of openings in the brass section all around the same time, and um, Atlanta was in the process of going through its first lockout, and and one of the openings was in bass trombone, and I was in the finals with Jim Markey for Boston, so they were looking for people to possibly fill in for the year. So I came in and played that one year in 2012, and Colin was locked out, and there was still an opening for the associate position, so he came up and played 8 or 10 weeks that season. Richard was in the same situation I was. We were just there to fill in, and Richard had been in the Atlanta Symphony for like 25 years, so he wasn't even considering moving, but he was certainly excited about the opportunity to play up here for a year. And I walked in for that trial year, or I say that the Philharmonic rented me for the year, but that was for that year. I walked in saying, they're going to have an opening. You know, if certainly Jim Markey could come back, and then they won't have an opening. But I'm not going to assume that. I'm going to assume there will be an opening. They'll probably have an audition later in the year. So day one is the first day of my audition, right? Like I just every day that I'm in there, I need to be a good colleague. Every day that I'm in there, I need to show them that I sound like I deserve the chair. And that's a great way to mature yourself as a player. When you're in school, don't treat yourself like a student that eventually you'll be good and eventually you'll take it all seriously. Like you start the first day. I've noticed when working with you that like you act professionally around the Philharmonic or Metropolitan Opera faculty. You're and that's the best way to be. You want to be treat yourself as high of a level as you can, and act walk the walk the best you can. Obviously, it's not always possible to do everything perfectly, but you'll start learning how to walk in those shoes if you just start doing it.
Of course. Uh, on continuing on that subject, some of your first rehearsals, both in the probation period and during that one year you did, was anything done carefully, so to speak, or was everything more laid back?
Well, you know, everybody's heard about these great musicians in the Philharmonic. Whether it's the Joe Alessi, Dave Finlayson, like Phil Smith was playing, Phil Myers. Like, um, uh, not only do they have a reputation of being just like the cream of the crop, but also being super intense, right? Like, I mean, as a student I didn't go to school in New York. I mean, I did spend a couple of years of artist diploma at Rutgers right near the end, or at the end of my schooling, but I didn't know any of these guys really personally. Yeah, so I walked in, and I had been playing in Atlanta for 6 years, and still didn't really know these guys. I'd seen them perform and stuff, but I knew of their intense reputation and that they were probably going to all be listening specifically uh, to how I fit in. And so my I was expecting like hazing, I guess. I mean, I don't know if that's the right word, but I was expecting them to basically go through and nitpick every little chord. But we sit down to the first rehearsal, and Joe walks over and he's like, "Hey, George, how you doing?" Gives me a big shake, and he's like, "It's great to have you here, and just have fun." And David was like super. I don't know if paternal is the right word, but he certainly went out of his way to make me feel super comfortable and be very helpful with everything. And Al Baer has been just a real pleasure to work with. He's a monster player and super comedian, and so we know how to get along together pretty well. So, um, but I never had any issues with that kind of stuff. I mean, I am a more chill, laid back kind of guy, so I'm not the guy who seems like he needs to have himself knocked down a peg usually. Um, put in my place. I'm pretty aware. I feel like of the whole like political atmosphere around me if I'm listening for it. So I think that's something that's really important for people to develop. Be able to sort of size people up in a way and be like, is this person you know likely to be helpful? Is this person likely to be testing me? I mean, certainly the opening 6 months or so that I was had been playing there, like there were a lot of like during the breaks, a lot of testing chords, testing passages. Not that that stopped, but we certainly do that. But I think that Joe definitely wants the section to sound good, and David definitely wants the section to sound good, and Al and so um, I think they wanted to at the very least just get a little bit more comfortable with playing me. So and you can't just no matter how comfortable it feels, there's a little bit of seasoning time that it takes. So we had some very casual little sectionals here and there, but I think that and we've sat down and played trios and quartets and things like that, and that really did help develop the section sound, so that we all sort of figured out our roles. Because regardless of whether it was Jim Markey or Don Harwood or Alan Ostrander sitting in that chair, that section's going to just stack on top of each other slightly differently. Everyone's sounds a little different, and their tendencies are a little different. So it helps everyone to have a better sense of that.
Awesome. Along with being a great colleague, do you have any tips or do's and don'ts of successfully passing a probation period, or for the possible long-term sub being asked to come back?
Yeah, there've been a bunch of long-term subs at the Philharmonic and other places for a variety of reasons. Maybe no music director. Maybe the committee and the music director have differing opinions. Maybe the committee itself is not having uh, not unified in its vision, or maybe the people that are auditioning don't sound like the people in the section. Like it's a great player, but I mean you're basically marrying this person. So you got to really make sure that it's going to be a good fit. If at least I feel like that if people take the care to do that, it usually works out well. Now there are other orchestras like the Metropolitan Opera, which is right across the plaza, that does their whole audition process behind the screen, and they get who they get. And I mean, both of them are not perfect. There are cases that you could point in both instances that have been difficult, but we try to make it as fair as I think it seems like as fair as possible, and then a little bit of subjective, preference at the end when you get two good players put both in the section, but see who's going to sound better. I mean, it matters more for like a bass trombone to fit in the section. Now, if you're principal trumpet, the section should be fitting to you, you know. Um, but you've got to also match somewhat of the general style of the orchestra, and there are a lot of differing opinions about that. Should that person just grow into it, or should they make the effort? And almost always, my opinion anyway, is that if somebody has to grow into the chair or change their style and the equipment, usually it doesn't work out. They usually don't get tenure, or there's usually a problem. And I think that usually the people who just sit in and are a good fit are people who are successful and leaders in the orchestra for a long time. And so it's worth waiting an audition or two sometimes to find somebody that you're like, man, I'm so glad we heard this guy. So, or girl, right? Um, and so, yeah, yeah, I think it's a challenge for sure.
Okay, awesome. You were, of course, in Atlanta before the Philharmonic. How many auditions did you take leading up to your appointment in Atlanta? And if there were several in between Atlanta and the Philharmonic, how many until you reached the New York Phil?
Well, for bass trombone, there aren't usually that many uh, openings. You know, when I had been when I won the job in Atlanta, it was 8 days after I won Rochester
Oh,
up
okay.
in New York, and but before that, there hadn't been a living wage audition, meaning like $20,000 or more in the country in 3.5 years. So for bass trombone, like I think Hartford had been there. I mean, it was like, and that at the time, I think bass trombone was like paying 15,000 part time. Like you could freelance in New York and do that gig. Um, so at the I had taken some auditions. I took Hartford. I took Kennedy Center and Lyric Opera and um, twice Jacksonville. There was a couple of 1 years and Quebec, close to where you are. That was another 1 year. And I did, and then there were like little tiny regional orchestras, like probably like half a dozen of like small regional orchestras that would pay, like pay five to 10 concerts per year, and you know, it's freelance type work. I took probably half a dozen of those. I picked up some of those when I was in Cincinnati, or um, I ended up playing in the Des Moines Metro Opera that's a tenured summer festival, which is nothing to sneeze at. Um, um, as far as you know, perpetual work or repeating work. Um, yeah, so there weren't too many options, to be honest. And I was just wondering when I was down in New World, it's like, well, am I wasting my time or not? Let's find out, because I've been doing a lot of 1 year auditions, and you're going to get different people showing up for a 1 year audition than for a full time audition in a big orchestra like Atlanta. So, um, so I was legitimately surprised when I won Rochester, and then kind of like not surprised, but again surprised, with Atlanta because it was such a big. Both of those were big leaps, and in Atlanta, you know, I took the audition up in New York, like while I was playing that first season in Atlanta. But again, I had gone from thinking I'm not sure if I'm going to do this for my career to all of a sudden I'm doing this in this big orchestra in Atlanta, and I'm like renting a house and I'm like learning how to play the job, and so I wasn't I I wasn't maybe my best prepared for the audition up here that Jim won, but he would have beat me, I think, but I'm pretty sure. So, um, but but anyway, so I played there for a few years. We started the symposium in Columbus. We were getting comfortable. I did. We finally bought a house, and my former colleague who used to play second trombone in Atlanta with me, and Colin, now plays in the Zurich Tonhalle. Bill Thomas said, "Don't buy a house. Once you buy a house, you're going to get another big gig." So he laughed about that one. Um, he but anyway, so we talked for. I mean, we were all good friends, but while I was there, I auditioned for. Well, I auditioned for Minnesota one of the summers. It was probably like 2011 or something like that, and that was when, like, right after that, they got locked out for like 18 months, and me and Andy Chappelle were the two finalists who had been given a trial sometime in the year that would have happened, you know, but never happened because they got locked out. And so then Boston happened, and I was in the finals there, and that sort of created the opportunity to come up to New York for the year. When Minnesota finally did get back in business, I had already won the audition in New York. So yeah, I mean, certainly I've had good success in a lot of auditions that I've taken. Um, either advancing or making it to finals in a bunch of them, but certainly not the number of players auditioning for bass trombone that there are for, I don't know, like principal trombone or principal horn or like there's just so many players. But I think that if you get to a certain level, like you're going to be competitive. It's sort of, if you're sounding kind of like the people that you're listening to in the recordings, right?
Right.
And how far you think you are, and every semester or every few months, you try to check in to see if they seem like they're even farther. Oftentimes they seem like they're getting farther away from you because you're learning the qualities of their sound and how they're doing what they're doing, and listening for things that you never listen to when you're listening as you're getting better. Your musical language is maturing, so it almost seems like these great players are even feeling farther away than they were back when you were a couple of years earlier. So, but you just keep on trudging forward and making music the best you can, and hopefully those people don't show up at your audition. It doesn't happen very often that like a Jim Markey or a Paul Pollard and a two bass trombone land will show up at an audition for you. That did happen actually in Boston, so that was yeah, a lot of good players were there, so not surprising. But anyway, you know, I feel like I was a fairly good tactician or strategist about how to prepare and what I want to sound like for an audition. Um,
Right.
some people just say, just play the way you play in the orchestra, and if they don't like it, screw them. But that wasn't exactly the way that 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 wasn't exactly the way I like to prepare. I think that there's an element you want to show them how to play in an orchestra or a band or whatever it is. Like the style, but there's a certain amount of refinement that you really need to be focusing on if you're going to be literally the only thing audible on the stage. They can hear so much of your sound if you're just by yourself. So certainly the sound was a really big, important part of that.
Right. How did you prepare for all of these auditions? I know there are countless ways to do so, but I just thought I'd ask.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, and that's changed over the years, and now I don't need to prepare for auditions anymore. Prepare for lots of other performances, which are, you learn from all those things that you do in the preparation for your auditions. Those are the same kinds of things that you would be considering in a performance for a solo recital or something. That they're slightly different factors, but maybe you don't want to blow them down the way you play in an orchestra in an audition, but at the same time, if you're playing in a recital, do you really want to try to do that in the first 5 minutes of your recital either? I mean, you probably want to save your face a little bit, so that you can survive through the whole process. Ultimately, what's the vision that you want? What's the vision you want the committee? You have to sort of try to get into their mind for a second. It's like you want them to be impressed with this beautiful sound. You want them to be impressed with the character that you sound like. You can almost hear the kind of person that's playing, right? When somebody plays from behind a screen. If you haven't listened from behind a screen from like mock auditions or something like that, people have to do that. It's super important because you start to hear, when you hear a bunch of different people back to back, wow, this person sounds very, very conservative or very overbearing, or maybe there's some physical things that they're thinking about, but there's a lot of bite and articulation to the sound, or there's lack of clarity. It's too wide, and and or for bass trombones, I was trying to avoid all the negative stereotypes. I didn't want to be the overbearing, playing too loud, too long, too slow, you know, on everything, um, and just being a pig basically, right? Like you play all of your excerpts sort of like a pig, then people will be like, this guy is not. I don't care how good he plays or she, and I think that that's so I wanted to relax the committee, right? I wanted them to enjoy my sound. I wanted them to just, I didn't want them to be thinking so hard about whether I'm rushing or dragging. I just want it to sound sort of like um, the piece that they're hearing, right? And that's there's not really a lot of magic involved in that, but that's something that's got to be sort of on your mind whenever you make any of your decisions about how to practice. So when I was in New World, I sort of refined my audition ideas. Don Green, who's a sports psychologist and has worked with a lot of musicians, uh, and had been actually employed at Juilliard for a while. Um, he gave strategies, and I thought that there were a lot of great things that he said. One of the things is he says um, you should be ready for your audition 3 weeks in advance, regardless of wherever things are. 3 weeks in advance, most of your preparation is done, right? When you're under pressure, the changes you make in the last week before an audition, if you've been preparing for a year, aren't really going to hold, right? Like you've been practicing excerpts for maybe 10, 20 years. Like if you make a change a week before an audition, you're either going to forget to do it, or it's going to cause you to make a mistake because you're not willing to commit to something because you're just being indecisive. So 3 weeks in advance, you decide that this is how it's going to sound, and you just want to have the best version of that you can possibly do. So you want to be able to execute and perform this level that you're at. And everyone's always pretty much unhappy with where they are 3 weeks in advance of an audition. So this you can't listen to this advice and say, well, I'll do it for next audition. No, 3 weeks in advance, stop practicing everything and start running it. Start doing mock auditions. Start. Before I won Atlanta, I had 23 or 25 mock auditions in that month or so before the audition. So when I actually played the 26th audition, it was like, it wasn't a big deal.
Yeah.
It was, but by this point I was so over it. Like I couldn't get that as nervous as I would normally have. And you just go and you play, and and you also have to know what works for you too. For me, I have to get a little bit of a chip on my shoulder before playing, or I play too chill. And so I remember walking out on stage. I remember vividly walking out on stage before like the semifinals or whatever, and thinking, screw you guys. Like if you guys don't like this is how I sound. And I just made a point to say I'm just gonna show them this is how all these excerpts go, and I don't care if you don't like it because this is how I think they go, and I know more than you do. It doesn't matter if I'm correct about that, but that's a great attitude to walk out on stage with, and I feel like that was one of the best rounds I'd ever played. Even after that, like that was as far as playing to my maximum. That was one of the best things best rounds I'd had, and people will remember even around a round if you had a good round. So, but people do not advance by accident. I think people who should advance don't, but those that advance deserved it. It's very rarely that like the majority of the uh, members of that are professional musicians will pick the worst player. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So, if you don't advance, that doesn't necessarily mean anything, but I think it really does mean something if you do advance. So, after you advance, it's a little bit of subjective. It's a little bit luck. You may end up being the second best player out of 10 people in semis, but you're sitting in between number one and number three. It may be harder to pick you into finals if they just heard somebody who's number one and number three might be closer to the way that they play, even if he's not, you know, objectively a better player. So you might end up getting cut because of just the proximity of players around you. You might get cut because you played number one, or because you were last, because they've already advanced too many people, or they can't possibly advance number one because there are 85 candidates to go. I think that's what happened with me in Rochester, though. I think I was like number one or two in prelims and advanced. So I was just like, I was super happy about that. But you never know, because you may accidentally not you may misjudge the level, and you listen to the first five or six. You know, maybe there's 8 people in a group. Group one, you advance 3 people because they all sound better than the guy that was playing the chair before. But then the second group sounds even better. You know, like you maybe had a lemon sitting in your chair for a while. You never know. So, um, but yeah, I mean, certainly breaking down the excerpts into fundamental etude versions of each other. I mean, sort of you can go through and do things like that. But you break it down to fundamentals. You don't blast the hardest excerpts. You try to play them with refinement. So for me, Fountains or Rheingold or Harianos or whatever, you play them at sort of a mezzo, the ride. You play them at mezzo forte, not too fast, dynamic, so you can really make them special. And then you get them closer and closer to what they, you know, the where you should be delivering them, whether it's a dynamic increase or a speed increase. So, but it's really hard. The older you get, it's really hard to like un to repair things that you've done wrong for lots of years. You know,
Right.
so you have to learn how to play things in a very fundamental kind of a way, so that you don't play them like excerpts. You play them like your warm up routine, where you're really conscious on sound and articulation, and then you gravitate towards what does this excerpt actually sound like.
Awesome. You studied with John Rojak while you were at Aspen. I worked with Dr. Rojak a month at Aspen and have had the chance to work with him in the youth symphony rehearsals and the occasional lessons. Knowing how much of a spirited character Dr. Rojak is, I'm sure you have a funny story or two of your time at Aspen, if you don't mind sharing.
Sure. Yeah. Um, I let's see. At the time, my future wife, my girlfriend Katie, was at Aspen and I was at Brevard, and I went out to Aspen to pick her up. Basically, it was sort of like a fun summer thing. Brevard got done earlier, and I set up a lesson with John while I was there, and he was just super relaxed, you know, and more chill than I am, and but and he was like in like hog heaven while he was there. That's like that's his place, is, you know, and I think I don't know if they're planning on, or they wanted to move out there or something. But I was out there for 2 summers. I was actually at Cincinnati at the time doing my master's, and I decided to go to Rutgers or audition. I auditioned at Rutgers and at Juilliard to study with him. And you know, for me, he was like the perfect kind of person at the time. I needed somebody who was more of like a relaxed mentor, like that was going to like give me some, you know, didn't need to be like a drill sergeant, you know, like and I wanted somebody to sort of help guide me out of school life. And I felt like he was a really good person for doing that. Like he'd been around for a long time. He knew pretty much everybody, played everything, and uh, and was very relaxed. I mean, he saw that he had a really motivated student on his hands, so he just sort of, you know, just made sure to, you know, stay positive with me and give me some opportunities to do some things. I mean, but I remember after finishing Cincinnati, I was going to be I was at Aspen, I guess, uh, and or maybe I called him and I said, so okay, and I have the summer to sort of do whatever I want to prepare to work with you. Do you have any assignments? Do you have repertoire? Um, you know, like, is there something you want me to be working on in preparation over the summer? Because it would be really nice to just have some structure. And I was just trying to be this really good student about everything, you know. And he's like, yeah, just practice playing perfectly. So, so it's like the exact opposite answer that I was asking for, but I tried really hard to practice that,
Right.
but it didn't work. Thanks, John. But no, but it was sort of like, you know, like, don't just think of specific repertoire. You know, I was trying to figure out what he meant, but he said, you know, don't just think so much about repertoire and everything. Like, make sure every note you play sounds great. So whatever your project is, don't just gloss over anything. So at least that's what I hope he meant. Maybe he just maybe he was just blowing me off, but I thought I never felt that, and we've kept in touch, and it's been very nice to work with him over the years.
That's great. For the remainder of this quarantine, what do you say to students who would like to take advantage of the time, but are struggling to find something to motivate them to do so? Or what do you say to people that, although we've been in quarantine for a month and a half,
Yeah.
are still struggling to stick to a routine or to, uh, I guess, accustom themselves to this new way of life?
You know, there's no great answer. There are a lot of, you know, cheesy answers I could give you, right? Um, but ultimately, if you know, who knows how full time you're going to be treating. You know, I can't. I'm trying to speak to everybody in every possible situation right now. So I don't. You know, some people are going to be, you know, students. Some people are going to be, you know, young or advanced professionals. Like, you sort of like see where you are, assess your situation. You know, assume that there will be no concerts until January or later. Um, and you have to make a financial plan. You know, and everybody has to make a financial plan, even if you're a student and in a super lucky situation to be like being helped by mom and dad. You know, like even if you're in a situation where you're financially, you know, not going to be ruined. You have to be careful about how you're spending your money, what you're doing, and you got to try to do something. So this is a time where there is no structure. So you have to use the tools that you've developed over the years to give yourself that. Um, and know if you are a structured person or if you're free spirited, right? And use those personality um, traits to help give yourself positive energy. I mean, if you're a totally free spirited, you know, person who needs like to sort of roll with it to be able to get some energy, don't try to put yourself in an you know, a hour by hour class, right? I mean, certainly that could probably help you as a skill, but like you want to make sure that you give yourself your time to be the kind of person you need to be. And also, um, but don't be lazy. You know, like give yourself very small, short goals, some medium goals, like a week. You know, goals that you want to do over the course of a week. Maybe I want to have played all the etudes in the Tarot book. You know, just run through them. That's a you know, give yourself small projects that are going to be putting you in a good direction in 1 week, right? And then the next week you do a different etude book, or you do a part of a book, or play through some solos or whatever. There are going to be longer, medium level projects that you're going to give yourself, whether it is um, to put, you know, to work on some piece that you've just not ever tackled, or to get in touch with some people, like to give yourself a list that I have to get in touch with 10 people that I've never reached out to and about taking lessons, giving lessons, you know, trying to create some sort of online content, trying to write a piece, you know, uh, and then a longer term goal, you want to set yourself up for being successful when the quarantine ends, so that you can just be like, you know, a bat out of hell as soon as people are able to start working, right? You want to develop relationships with people, um, that will uh, help you, be in a good position to succeed when people are finally locked out of our, let out of our boxes. There's going to be a ton of turnover. There's going to be a lot of change. The landscape's going to be a lot different. Who has been playing? Certainly, a lot of people are going to retire. And there are going to be people who are going to get sick from this and are not going to be able to or won't come back. There are going to be people. There are going to be small orchestras that are going to go under. There are going to be certainly a lot of vacancies that are going to need to be filled, and basically whatever the lockdown of, people talk about how this for that freelance scene is totally locked down. Well, that's going to be all up in the air when things come up, So if you're making good connections, you're working with people, there are a lot of positive things to come out of this. I think if you have an active chamber group or some group of people that you've been working with, certainly working with people in any way, even if it's limited, like through a cappella or something, who knows, go out into the middle of a cornfield 20 feet apart and try to practice together or something. You know, there are ways to stay active with people, and you just start writing a list, or brainstorm with a couple of your friends who you would hope to work with, and just sit down and be like, we're not leaving this room till we've covered a page of ideas. Most of them are going to be whatever, but like it's a process to get yourself thinking creatively about what options are out there. There are lots of them, and but don't sit around being like, if I just practice as hard as I can, everything will be fine. I mean, people are you're going to need to make money doing something. I don't know what that necessarily is going to look like for everybody. I mean, a lot of people can't get out of their house, so they have to do it all virtually. So it's a challenge. But don't spend any money you don't need to. Pretty much nothing is mandatory except for food, and even that, you're going to have to be careful of what you buy. And I think everybody, if they keep a positive attitude and keep doing something, creating some product, even if it's only for yourself, you could make a pact with a couple of friends to be like, we're going to send each other recordings every week, or talk to your teachers. I mean, these people have been around and will have connections, have ideas, know you're playing well enough to give you some advice. But take everyone's advice and then throw it out the window and do what you need to do. So.
Awesome. That's great. So we've reached the end here. And at the end, for as long as I can, I'm going to do these 5 rapid fire questions. Some of them are having to do with music, some of them not. And we'll get to it. What was the last thing you listened to?
Oh. Well, actually, I'm a really big fan of Tool's new album. They're a heavy metal, whatever group. First band I ever went to was Metallica, actually. So.
That's awesome. If you could play one piece for the rest of your life, what would it be?
What did I say? Something like John Cage, 3 minutes and whatever. But one piece. I don't know. We were going to play Mahler 2 on tour. That's a really great piece, and pretty epic scope.
Awesome. If you could listen to one piece or song for the rest of your life, what would it be? Like Goldberg variations, Bach piano, Bach keyboard stuff is just, there's something just so, puts the world in order somehow, even if it doesn't feel like it. Right on. You're a big fan of sci-fi. What is your favorite sci-fi movie?
Sci-fi movie? Man. I don't know. Probably Empire Strikes Back, if I have to be. There's some good ones. Most of them are post-apocalyptic, though. It's getting a little too close to home these days.
What is the most beautiful place you've been to?
Maybe I mean, it's hard. There are lots of great places. Uh, sometimes the place you're at is also sort of it's um, partly where you are in your life. You know, like it makes it more sentimental for you. When the Philharmonic went on tour to Ireland, I went there with Katie, and she was expecting at the time, and actually Katie's mom was on tour for part of it, and we went to Ireland. The orchestra started in Ireland, and we had a couple days before that we got there early and went over to Galway, and the Cliffs of Moher are on that side, and it was like late April, early May, and it was like a super sunny, and it was just the most beautiful thing I could think of. If you don't know what that is, it's sort of like maybe you've seen the Cliffs of Dover, sort of like that. And there's like this path along the top of it with no fence or anything, and like it's 5 feet from the edge, or less, and you can just look straight down several hundred feet, and you just walk all the way along it. It was super. It was just amazing. Right. The birds and the surf, you could like the mist would sometimes even be coming all the way up there, and it's perfect weather.
That's awesome. Well, all right, Mr. Curran, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks
Uh,
for having me, Brandon.
yeah, absolutely. Sorry to everyone out there and you as well for the technical difficulties, but I'm glad we were still able to find a solution and do this.
Yeah, well, I guess this is going to be up on Facebook Live or
Yeah,
Facebook. Post it up on Facebook, so you guys can make comments in the feed there, and I'll try to check the maybe put this in the subtitle for the post. That if you got any questions, that I'll show up and give you some comments or answer some questions in the comment section.
absolutely. All right, Mr. Curran, keep staying safe, healthy. We'll keep in touch. If you're ever in Montreal, feel free to shoot me an email. There's plenty of good poutine to be had around here. So,
Excellent.
yeah.
One place I've been meaning to come, so or go visit. So I'll take you up on that.
Awesome. All right.
Yep.
See you later.
See you. Bye bye.
Bye.